before Netflix, before Henry Cavill grunted, in a bathtub, before Gwent addicts neglected their real lives for a card game buried inside a bigger game. There were 3 video games that turned a Polish fantasy series most of the world had never heard of into one of the most beloved franchises in gaming history. This is the complete story of the Witcher games, how a small, broke studio in Warsaw clawed its way from a janky cult RPG to one of the greatest trilogies ever made, and where the saga goes next. Grab your potions. Let's dive in. Before we talk games, we need the basics. Geralt of Rivia is a Witcher, a monster hunter created through a brutal childhood process called the Trial of the Grasses, which mutates children with alchemical concoctions to give them superhuman reflexes, strength, and resistance to magic and disease. Most kids don't survive the trials. The ones who do lose most of their emotions in the process and gain cat-like eyes and white hair as a side effect. Witchers are trained from childhood at fortresses like Kaer Morhen, then sent out into the world to kill monsters for coin. They're feared and often despised by regular people, treated as freakish mutants rather than heroes, even though they're usually the only thing standing between villagers and something with too many teeth. The games are based on the novels and short stories written by Polish author Andrzej Sapkowski starting in the 1980s. The books follow Geralt's journey, his complicated found family relationship with the sorceress Yennefer, and his adopted daughter figure Ciri, a princess with unique, terrifying magical potential tied to prophecy and the fate of the world. Crucially, the games are not a retelling of the books. They pick up as a continuation after the novels end, with CD Projekt Red, a Polish studio that had never made a game before, securing the rights for what was reportedly a shockingly small sum, because almost nobody else wanted them. That gamble became one of the best studio origin stories in gaming. CD Projekt Red released the first Witcher game in 2007, built on a heavily modified version of BioWare's Aurora engine, the same engine that powered Neverwinter Nights. The studio was small, underfunded, and largely unknown outside Poland. Nobody expected this game to matter. The story opens with Geralt suffering from amnesia after being attacked at Kaer Morhen, the Witcher's stronghold, which is stormed by a mysterious group hunting for Witcher secrets and old research. From there, Geralt travels to the city of Vizima and its surrounding swamps and slums, getting tangled in a conflict between racist human nobility, an oppressed non-human underclass of elves and dwarves, a terrorist resistance group called the Scoia'tael, and a shadowy organization called the Order of the Flaming Rose. Mechanically, the first Witcher is rough by modern standards. Combat uses a rhythm-based click system, where timing matters more than reflexes. The game leans heavily into alchemy, brewing potions and oils before fights actually matters, not just for flavor. And yes, the game became notorious for its collectible sex scene cards, a marketing decision that aged about as well as you'd expect, and that CD Projekt Red has since distanced itself from. But underneath the jank was something genuinely special, a fantasy story willing to sit in moral gray areas. There are barely any purely good or purely evil factions. Every quest branches into consequences that aren't clearly right or wrong. Help the elves, and you might be enabling terrorists killing innocent farmers. Help the human authorities, and you might be enabling ethnic cleansing. The game refused to hold your hand about which choice was correct, because often there wasn't one. In 2008, CD Projekt Red released an enhanced edition, which fixed technical issues, added professional voice acting, rebalanced quests, and added extra content, including 2 entirely new side quests. This enhanced edition became something of a CDPR trademark. The studio built a reputation for supporting its games for free long after release, a habit they'd repeat spectacularly with the next 2 entries. The first Witcher was a sleeper hit, not a blockbuster, but a real success that proved a Polish studio with a modest budget could build something Western RPG fans would care about. It funded the studio's next big swing. The Witcher 2 was a massive technical leap. CD Projekt Red built their own engine, the Reed engine, and the improvement showed immediately. The plot follows Geralt on the trail of the real 2011 behind a string of regicides, the assassinations of kings across the northern kingdoms. after Geralt himself is framed for one of the murders. Along the way, he gets pulled into political warfare involving King Foltest, the sorceress Triss Marigold, Vernon Rauch's Blue Stripes Special Forces, and the Skoya Tel resistance again, this time led by the ruthless elf commander Iorveth. The single biggest structural decision in Witcher 2 was splitting Act 2 based on a choice made at the end of Act 1, side with Vernon Roche or side with Iorveth, and the game sends you down an almost entirely different path with different maps, different characters, and different plot revelations depending on which one you pick. This was an enormous expensive gamble for a mid-sized studio, essentially building two versions of a chunk of the game, and it signaled that CD Projekt Red was serious about player choice actually mattering. Not just cosmetically, combat was completely reworked into a more traditional action RPG system, still with a heavy emphasis on preparation, alchemy, and using signs, Geralt's limited magical abilities, like Igni for fire or Ard for a telekinetic push. The game was also brutally difficult on release, especially early on, and CD Projekt Red patched it repeatedly to rebalance the opening hours after player backlash. As with the first game, they released a big free content update, the Enhanced Edition, in 2012, adding a new tutorial, extra content, and a full new setting piece, an arena combat mode. Critically, Witcher 2 is where the series' reputation as a grown-up fantasy RPG really solidified. Dense political intrigue, morally messy characters, and a refusal to give you an easy good guy path. It sold well, built serious buzz, and set the stage for CD Projekt Red's next game to become one of the most important RPGs ever made. If you've heard of one Witcher game, it's this one. The Witcher 3 threw out the more linear act-based structure of the first two games entirely and went full open world with three massive interconnected regions: the war-torn borderlands of Velen, the sprawling free city of Novigrad, and the Norse-inspired Skellige Isles. It also added the island regions from the two expansions later on. The central plot finally brings the series' long-running emotional core to the forefront. Geralt's search for Ciri, the princess he raised as a daughter, who has been missing and is being hunted by the Wild Hunt, a terrifying group of spectral, otherworldly riders led by the elder blood-obsessed King Eredin. The larger backdrop is the northern kingdoms being invaded by the Nilfgaardian Empire, a war that displaces and ruins the lives of ordinary people throughout Velen in particular. Some of the game's most devastating writing has nothing to do with the main plot at all, and everything to do with peasants trying to survive in a war zone. What made Witcher 3 a genuine phenomenon wasn't just its scale, it was the density of quality. Side quests that, in most RPGs, would be filler: find a missing husband, solve a local haunting, hunt a monster, for a farmer, routinely turned into some of the best short stories in the entire game, often with zero clean resolution. The infamous Bloody Baron questline, where Geralt helps a violent alcoholic nobleman search for his missing wife and daughter, is frequently cited as one of the best pieces of writing in any video game, precisely because it refuses to let you feel good about any of the outcomes. The game leaned harder into meaningful choice and consequence than either predecessor, with decisions from earlier hours, sometimes from the previous game, if you imported a save, rippling out to affect the ending, which characters lived or died, and the political fate of entire regions. Combat was refined again. A mix of swordplay, signs, bombs, and the ever-present Witcher potions and oils, alongside a new crafting and gear system, with hundreds of swords, armor sets, and eventually full Witcher gear sets tied to lore from the books. And then there's Gwent, a card minigame Geralt can play against non-player characters across the map, which became so popular that CD Projekt Red spun it off into its own free standalone game. The Witcher 3 launched in 2015 to critical acclaim and swept Game of the Year awards. It also became a case study in developer goodwill. CD Projekt Red released 16 free DLC packs post-launch, new quests, gear, and modes before even getting to the paid expansions, a level of post-launch generosity that was almost unheard of at the time. Hearts of Stone, released in 2015, is a smaller, tighter, standalone-ish story. Geralt is hired by the mysterious, wealthy Olgierd von Everec, who turns out to be cursed and effectively immortal After making a deal with a Faustian reality warping entity called the Man of Glass, or Gaunter O'Dim, widely considered one of the best written villains in the franchise. Hearts of Stone is shorter, but extremely dense, and its ending is the kind of twist people still discuss online a decade later. Blood and Wine, released in 2016, is the larger final send-off expansion, sending Geralt to the sunny, chivalric duchy of Toussaint, a deliberate tonal shift from the grim, war-torn north, full of vineyards, knights, and fairy tale aesthetics hiding something much darker underneath. It closes out several long-running threads for Geralt personally, and is widely regarded as one of the best pieces of paid DLC ever made. Essentially a full extra game. Between the base game and its 2 expansions, The Witcher 3 sold tens of millions of copies, and later got a free next-gen upgrade in 2022, adding ray tracing, Netflix-inspired cosmetic gear, and quality-of-life features years after its original release, on the back of the Netflix show's success. The Witcher's success spawned a small universe of side projects. Gwent, the Witcher card game, turned the in-universe minigame into its own free-to-play competitive card game, with faction-based deck building around the Northern Realms, Nilfgaard, Skellige, Scoia'tael, and monsters. Thronebreaker, The Witcher Tales, repurposed Gwent's card mechanics into a full single-player story campaign, following Queen Meve of Lyria and Rivia during the war with Nilfgaard, a much more narrative-driven, RPG-adjacent take on the card game. There's also The Witcher, Monster Slayer, a mobile augmented reality game in the style of Pokemon Go, letting players hunt monsters overlaid on the real world, though it was later discontinued. And of course, the Netflix live-action series, the animated film Nightmare of the Wolf, and a mountain of tie-in books and comics, none of which are games, but all of which fed the same growing appetite for the setting. None of the spin-offs approached the cultural weight of the main trilogy, but they kept the world alive between major releases, and Gwent in particular built its own, smaller, dedicated competitive community. So where does the story go from here? CD Projekt Red officially confirmed a new Witcher game exists back in 2022 under the internal codename Polaris. It was formally revealed at the Game Awards in December 2024 with a cinematic trailer, confirming the biggest twist of the next era of the franchise. This new game centers on Ciri as the protagonist, not Geralt, a genuine passing of the torch to the character the entire trilogy was arguably always building toward. The Witcher 4, as fans commonly call it, is being built in Unreal Engine 5 rather than CD Projekt's in-house RE engine, and is confirmed to be the first entry in an entirely new trilogy, meaning this isn't a one-off sequel, but the start of a new multi-game saga, alongside spin-off titles reportedly in development under names like Canis Majora and Sirius. As of CD Projekt Red's most recent public comments in 2026, the game is deep into full-scale production, with the development team having grown past 500 people. But the studio has explicitly ruled out a 2026 release and has declined to commit to any specific release window. The studio has said the whole new trilogy is intended to launch within roughly a 6-year span, which at least gives fans some sense of the long-term pacing, even without a first release date. What we do know, CD Projekt Red has said the new game will be larger in scope than The Witcher 3, will not contradict any of Witcher 3's multiple possible endings, and is putting a heavy emphasis on player agency and choice once again, suggesting the branching, consequence-driven DNA of the original trilogy is very much intact for this next chapter. Realistically, based on the studio's own comments, most fans and outlets are treating 2027 or later as the earliest plausible release window, so this next chapter of Geralt's world, now centered on Ciri, is still a ways off. So that's the saga, start to finish, from a scrappy, janky 2007 RPG built by a studio nobody had heard of, to one of the most influential trilogies in gaming history, to a brand new chapter about to begin with a different hero at the center. What's remarkable, looking back at all three games together, is how consistent the philosophies stayed, even as the technology and scale exploded. No easy answers, no clean heroes, and choices that actually cost you something. If you want a deeper dive into any one game, the Bloody Baron questline, the Gwent mechanics, or everything we know so far about The Witcher 4, let me know in the comments, and I'll cover it in a follow-up. Thanks for watching. Toss a coin to your Witcher, and I'll see you in the next video.